Congressman Ron Paul criticized conservatives who support an aggressive foreign policy.
They believe that we have this moral responsibility to use force to go around the world and say, you will do it our way or else. Well, force doesn't work. It never works.
Force never works? What about World War II? Force can work.
Defensive force, sure, it better work. You know, if you're a freedom-loving nation and somebody comes and attacks you or us, yes, we should use force in retaliation. So there's a difference in which way you're using the force.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer joins us now. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he's now with the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. You differ with the congressman.
I do. I think we practically have to defend our equities. And this is where I think there's a clear division between using brute force without an end result in mind. And frankly, the bottom line, you brought up, John, you brought up World War II. Parmenides, a Greek philosopher in 485 BC, said, nature abhors a vacuum. We inherited an empire. I'm not saying it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but we have, for better or for worse, been the force of good on this planet. Not that we should be the policemen of the universe, but we have certain things that we, I think, are obligated to defend both by treaty and by our own values.
Congressman?
But the big thing is defending our interests. He implies that, you know, oil might be our interests. And yes, we have a right to defend our country, but to pose our will around the world, that's how we get into so much trouble and have gotten into so much trouble. And I've seen no benefit from it. You know, I was in high school during the Korean War, and we're still there. Vietnam, I was in during those period of time for 5 years. What a waste, and now we're in wars constantly, and we don't even defend ourselves well enough. We're out there just stirring up trouble because what do we have? We have a true blowback problem that we have to face up to. I mean, the whole idea of us imposing a dictator in Iran, the Shah, it came back to haunt us. It's still there today. And now we go into Iraq to impose our will on Iraq, and there was no threat whatsoever, zero threat.
Well, Tony,
we virtually turned over Iraq to the Iranians now. They're close allies of the Iranians.
I think it's an issue. Well,
you say we need to protect our oil interests.
Well, we do. And this is one of the things that we have again inherited by the fact of our strength. We have great strength. It should not be abused. I agree with the congressman. In many of those instances, we have made very bad choices as a nation. But what we have to do now is play this as a chess game. We have to use the resources we have to maintain the equities. And I use the equities in this case are the ability to have our people, the American people, have the way of life we've come to understand and appreciate, for better or for worse. And that means in many instances maintaining the supply of oil and natural resources that we have and enjoy. That's the bottom line.
Hey. Let the man talk here. Congressman can defend himself.
Yeah, that's rather frightening, because when you think about what we do, we're doing exactly that. There's no doubt about it. Our oil interests go over, they invest oil. Why do you think we're in Libya today? We have Britain, the United States.
I think we're in Libya because it was horrible to watch people be slaughtered by a horrible dictator.
Yeah, of course, they were never slaughtered. They just said fearful, oh yeah, like Saddam Hussein has a nuclear weapon and he's going to attack us tomorrow. But on the oil, our military becomes nothing more than a police force for our investments overseas. If there's a vacuum out there, who cares? I mean, why do you have to? Why are we have a moral obligation?
Well, I think if we have $10 oil at the pump, I think the American people would be very upset about that. This is the deal.
And if we didn't have our military presence,
we have made some.
We would have $10 oil.
Well, we have made some very bad choices regarding independence of energy. I think the Congress would probably agree we've made some hugely bad choices. With that said, what we have left to do is find a way to maintain the supply we have until we find additional resources. Right now, for better or for worse, a lot of those resources are in the Middle East. Not only do we depend on it, our allies depend on it. Japan, Korea, all these other nations. And I don't know if you've all been there lately. We have done a great deal of good by having a presence there. Japan, Germany, Korea. Taiwan. Taiwan is another area. So we have obligations. These are our allies. We cannot midstream abandon our allies or our interests overseas.
And the entangling alliances really bother me. You know, we've had an alliance, you know, defend Taiwan. People say, oh, well, if Taiwan's attacked, tomorrow we have to send all these young people there to defend Taiwan. I think that's a bunch of baloney. We shouldn't have to do that. Why?
We have a treaty.
We have a treaty. The moral question is how can a generation 2 or 3 times removed write a law that says we have this moral obligation to automatically go to war?
Congressman,
there's no right to take...
Let me answer that. For better or for worse, I grew up during the Cold War. I envisioned myself dying in the late 80s on a battlefield in Europe defending our equities in Europe. That's the way I came up. So at times, I think it's almost necessary to sacrifice some for the greater good. I believe that we were obligated then to defend the Europeans against the Soviet threat.
That's where we disagree, basically.
And on that note, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Schaefer. Dr. Paul, stick around. We've arranged for you to debate this man. He's here. But first, some libertarians think Ron Paul should ditch the Republican Party and work with the left. That's next. The Ron Paul revolution, that's what the congressman's supporters called his last presidential campaign. It would be a revolution to shrink government to what the founders had in mind. The Constitution's this thin. Though I don't think that's necessarily what the Beatles had in mind. But given Dr. Paul's opposition to foreign wars and the war on drugs, he wants to end that, I would think many on the left would support him. History professor Thaddeus Russell thinks Dr. Paul makes a mistake by running as a Republican. Thaddeus, why?
Well, I think if we're going to end the wars, if we're going to end the American empire, the only thing that will do that is a coalition between the left and people like Ron Paul. And in fact, he knows that he's talked with Ralph Nader in public and with Bernie Sanders and other very left-wing people in American political discourse about doing just that. And so I know that Ron Paul agrees with me in this project of working with the left generally.
I have certainly worked with those on the left and with the progressives. I think our problem that we face is
And just to back that up, I mean, you're right about Bernie Sanders, Barney Frank. Right. You've co-authored bills with Tammy Baldwin, Dennis Kucinich.
Right. I work with coalitions. People talk about our solution comes from compromise. I don't like the word compromise. That's why you give up half your beliefs, and I don't believe that.
I agree with you.
But if you find a...
I agree with you.
If you find a Dennis Kucinich and others on the other side, and we believe in the same thing, then we come together on those beliefs.
One of your great causes that you worked with Ralph Nader on during the last election was to break this horrible two-party duopoly. It was a wonderful thing that you did with him and Cynthia McKinney and Bob Barr. And I think that it would be a good thing. I might even vote for you.
You know, the problem is, you know, we send troops overseas, and one of the goals is that we're going over there and make the world safe democracy, impose our will, and teach the Afghans to have elections like we do. Then they have elections. We don't like them, so we ignore them.
Right.
But here in this country, you know, the process of democracy isn't all that great, you know, because if you come to the conclusion you may have, if the two parties are not too much different in foreign policy per se, they're the same thing.
Exactly.
Where's the alternative? It has to come outside, and that's what you're suggesting. But unless you're Ross Perot and have a lot of money, getting on balance is tough. I probably wouldn't be sitting here today if I wasn't running as, you know, I'm a Republican congressman, so they sort of force you into the system.
They'll vote for you if you're an independent. I guarantee you.
All right, but so we need to make it a little bit easier for competition.
Thaddeus, half the people, most of the people on the left, they're hostile to free markets.
Well, I am a man of the left. The left is hostile to freedom in certain areas, in particular in economics. And so that is the difference that won't go away. What I would love to see, though, is for people like Ron Paul, good libertarians in my view, coalesce with people on the left around issues like foreign policy, around civil liberties, around corporatism, the collusion between corporations and government that I know you, again, have worked with progressives and leftists on in many ways, and that was a wonderful, exciting. Ralph Nader said that was the most exciting political dynamic in American politics in many, many years, and I agree with him. I'd like to see more of it.
And areas where you agree with the left, the war, the bailouts, you're against the corporate bailouts and all corporate welfare, farm subsidies, export help for certain companies. I assume you were against the recent crackdowns on internet poker? Assume the left is too. Free speech, you don't want the FCC to censor. You're okay with pornography and prostitution? You're a social conservative.
Well, I'm socially not endorsing it personally as much as legally.
I am. I'm endorsing it.
But we can agree on the liberty.
I'm going to get more votes than you.
Make your own. I'm in agreement that we all get to make our own choices.
Absolutely. No, we are. We are in agreement. Yes. We're in agreement. Yes.
Let me ask, when I came out of the closet as a libertarian, I thought,
So to speak.
I thought it was the left that would embrace these ideas, because some of them, things like saying there should be legal drugs or prostitution, it's just abhorrent to some people on the right. But the left has been horribly hostile to me. I had a best-selling book I couldn't get on NPR or the New York Times. I got on Fox. I don't get why the right is more tolerant to these ideas.
I think it's true. On some of the civil liberty issues, they will be more tolerant. It's mixed up. We need to get this whole principle of personal liberty put back together again.
Let's see a coalition on these issues, on these many issues. We can name 10 to 15, maybe 20 major issues in American politics right now on which the left and libertarians like Ron Paul agree. And then, in the course of that, let's have a discussion about the market.
On that note, thank you, Thaddeus Russell. It's clear if Ron Paul runs for president, he will run as a Republican. And then, if nominated, he will debate President Obama. When we return. Oh, come on. Ron Paul, when we return, goes head-to-head with this man. Of all the Republicans at CPAC, who won the straw poll? This man, Ron Paul.
But then another presidential candidate stepped to the podium and said, forget about it.
I like Ron Paul. I think he's a good guy. But honestly, he has just zero chance of getting elected. You have to win an election.
Zero chance is what they say.
Can't get much worse than that.
Well, what do you... Of course, if he wins the Republican nomination, then he'll get to debate President Obama. What would that be like? To give us an idea, the president has graciously agreed to debate Ron Paul tonight on this show. Please welcome President Obama. All right, I will play the role of moderator here. Congressman Paul's a big advocate of free markets. What's your problem with free markets?
John, look. Now, I believe in the power of the free market. But a free market was never meant to be a free license to take whatever you can get. Now, that's what caused the recent crisis, and that's why we need more regulation.
More regulation, Congressman.
Yes, we need more regulations on the politicians and on the bureaucrats. That's where the regulations should be. The people should be left alone.
But seriously, lack of regulation caused the crisis?
No, I think the idea that the government was over-regulating, everybody felt like the government would take care of them and that housing bubbles could last forever, and there was a moral hazard to it. If you have a free market, there's plenty of regulations. The regulations are that if you don't do a good job and you don't serve the consumers don't buy the products, and they go bankrupt and they go out of business. That's a pretty strong regulation. Regulation, follow up your contracts. If you break your contract, you're in big trouble. If you hurt the environment, you're in big trouble because you're violating somebody else's property. So there's a lot of very strict regulations in a free market economy.
Mr. President, you say it's government that brings us innovation?
Well, listen. Now, government needs to invest in our future. Half a century ago, when the Soviets beat us into space with the satellite called Sputnik, NASA didn't exist. But after investing in better research and education, a wave of innovation created millions of new jobs.
Congressman Paul, that sounds good.
Yes, but he makes the assumption it wouldn't have happened unless government did this. They say that. And quite frankly, there would probably be more funds for innovation than if the government uses the innovations and passes out the funds for political reasons. The funds would be spent in the market.